All right, so today we're going to plan for a patient who has a non-restorable tooth number 30. As you can see here, we will plan in Blue Sky Plan the surgical guide, and we will probably remove part of this broken tooth digitally in the software. So let's get to it. All right, so we go to here, easy CT dicom viewer. Let's find the patient. Okay, so here's the cone beam. This is where the software allows you to change the orientation of the cone beam. Now, getting the orientation perfect is not super important for a single implant. It becomes a lot more important when you are planning for an entire arch for an all-on-X procedure. Let's get it as close as we can anyway. Now, if you look over here in the lower left, you look closely, look at the angle of the mandible here in the inferior aspect of the mandible. You can tell that these are not lined up really well. So how would we fix that? We would go over here. No, that's worse. That's better. That's better. Let's see. That's pretty close. Okay, now these are coinciding. We don't see two of them. What's up here? Okay, that looks a little tilted. Let's see if we can straighten that out. Okay, this is still straight. Now this kind of looks like it's tilted upwards with the plane of occlusion. Let's bring that down a bit. And this looks a little tilted. Let's try to straighten that out. And I believe that looks pretty good. So let's crop it. Start with the easiest part first. And we don't need to see the spine or the airway, so let's get rid of that data. We don't need to see air up there. Remember, this is a mandibular case. Let's get rid of any excess data that we don't need for our planning purposes. And that looks pretty good. Hit OK. All right, then I hit next. When you start the software, when you start Blue Sky Plan in the easy CT dicom viewer mode, it will put you into Model Master mode here. In the upper right, notice I'm in Model Master. Go to Tools, Automatic Jaw Segmentation. That's the first thing I do. Now, we don't need it to segment the maxilla. We're working on the mandible, so segment the mandible. Let's go with that. If you have an old computer, it's best to segment one jaw at a time. If you have a fast computer, it will tolerate segmentation of both at the same time. Okay, that's finished. So let's go to advanced mode. Let's get out of Model Master mode, go to advanced mode. All right, if your screen does not look like this, I recommend that you make it look like this. How do we do that? We go to View, Perspectives, Implant Tangential 3. Some people like Implant Tangential 5, which is just 5 of these windows here instead of 3. Otherwise, it's the same as what I had a moment ago. I like Implant Tangential 3. That's just my preference. I find it to be the most useful. All right, so we've already segmented out the mandible. Why did we bother doing that? We bothered doing that so that we can get rid of this cone beam, which is ugly and not very useful. What did the mandibular segmentation accomplish? What it did was it rendered a mandibular bony model from the cone beam CT. Emphasis on bony model. That is to say, it stripped away all the soft tissue from the bony model and isolated the mandibular bone and the mandibular teeth. So with that in mind, let's get the cone beam off the screen. So I'll go over to the right side of the screen and uncheck the cone beam. Now we have a nice clean model here. All right, that's a lot easier to work with, a lot easier to see than the cone beam. Okay, let's shrink that again. Now it's time to import the STL model for the mandible. I've already downloaded that from iTero. We want the STL for the L for lower. It's asking if this is maxillary or mandibular. We know it's mandibular, so hit OK. Okay, let's check to see if this merge was accurate. Looks like there's a lot of overlap with the iTero scan, the blue against the teeth that were rendered from the cone beam. But if you want to check it, let's get the vertical. See this elevator here? This brings our vertical up and down. Let's get the vertical onto the teeth of the mandible, and let's get our slider over to the left, and let's turn it this way. Why? That we can see how the blue overlaps with the cone beam teeth. So let's start looking. So I'm looking over here to see if the blue of the iTero model lines up with the mandibular teeth that the cone beam detected. I'd say that's pretty darn close. Look at how the blue is basically overlapping with the color of the cone beam teeth. Yep. Good. Good. Very good. Very good. Very good. Very good. Very good. All right, so we know we have a good merge. All right, so let's get rid of the cone beam teeth on the model. Let's put our slider over to area number 30. Now, what size implant do we think would fit there? Now, typically for a molar, I will plan a 5mm diameter implant. Let's hit plus implant. All right, let's go to a 5. Let's say 5 by 10. We can always switch it. Now, you could place the implant over here. In this window, you could place it over here. Heck, you could even place it here if you wanted to. Let's place it here. All right, maximize that. And let's see here. That's too close to here. Let's move it up. Let's lock that in place. Let's name it as number 30. And then, all right, notice on this model we have part of a tooth here. We have only part of number 30 showing. All right. Go to surfaces, find that model. That's this. Notice the blue. All right. Let's go to model manipulation. Let's create a closed model from that model. Make sure that is what is selected under model manipulation. Make sure this is on mandible. Okay. We're going to create a closed model. Let's do that. Now, why are we creating a closed model? Because we want to trim this broken root of number 30 out of the model so that we can make our surgical guide fit. We want, because remember, in the operatory when we do the case, we're going to remove this broken number 30 first and then put the guide on. And it's a lot easier to trim a closed model instead of trimming an open model. So let's get the closed model on the screen only. Let's get rid of the bony model. Let's get rid of the nerve for now. Now, before we start trimming this, let's duplicate it. Go over to here, duplicate. Notice we have 2. Anything trimmed, I like to make purple. That's just a habit I have. So we have the original in the green, the original closed model, and we have the purple one, the one I'm going to trim. So let's start with the purple one. Now, if I trim from here, it's going to put a hole in the left side of the model. So let's trim from here. Get out of cut mode. Let's take a look. Do we need to trim more? I'd say yes. All right. I'd like to be able to trim from this right side without worrying about the left. And let's be honest here, we don't need this part of the model for our guide. So in cut mode, let's get rid of this part of the model completely since we don't need it for anything. Okay. Back to cut mode. Looks like I over trimmed there. How do I know? We could hit Control Z, or you could hit the back arrow here on the upper left to go backwards one step. Yeah, I over trimmed because that Control Y to redo, Control Z to undo. Look how that's over trimmed. If I over trim, the guide won't fit. So let's do it like this. I think that's sufficient trimming. We can trim a little bit more. All right, get out of cut mode. Let's examine. Okay, I'm happy with that. Okay. So now that we trimmed out those chunks of tooth that will be extracted. Now, by the way, let's get rid of this junk over here. That's ugly. Yeah, that's better. All right. Now, for the purpose of making implant planning easier, let's add tooth number 30 to this site. So we go to here, add tooth. Find tooth number 30. Click OK. Please select an antagonist. Let's not select an antagonist because I did not put an antagonist model into the software. I just imported only the mandibular. Okay, so that worked. Right click, lock the tooth. I think that tooth looks about how I would want it to look in real life. Yep. Now we could play around with it a little bit if we want to. Unlock the tooth and start doing this. You could make it grow in the buccal direction. I think it looks fine. Lock the tooth. All right, why did we do that? So that we could plan this a little bit more easily. Okay, right now, our implant path is a little bit distal. Let's fix it. We're also pointed a little bit lingually. So let's go in the buccolingual view and straighten this out if we can. Now we might need to go to a 5x8. There's no shame in using a 5x8 implant. Yeah, that's a pretty good position that I see over here, but let's see. Let's do our spin around. Now, I don't like this. This tells me that over here, there's not going to be any buccal bone. I'm not real happy about that. So we might switch to a 5x8, but let's see how this looks. Yeah, I don't like that. Replace 5x8. Let's try that. Why 5x8? Because I can put it deeper and away from that buccal lack of bone. All right, start at the top. Remember, there's no bone here when this extracted chunk of tooth is missing. I'm not crazy about that. Or I'm not too happy about that, is what I mean. All right, I would have bone here on the mesial if I put the implant in this position. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that looks good over here. I'm pretty happy with that. Now let's lock the implant so I don't accidentally move it. I'll start at the top. Do I have bone all the way around the implant? So far, pretty much yes. No, not here. I don't like this. How can I fix that? Maybe I could unlock the implant and move it distally. Okay, let's see if that works. Start at the top. Ooh. No, not really. I'm too far mesial. Start at the top. This would work, but let's see if we can get it better. Lock the implant. Maximize this. Start at the top. Okay. No. Now I have bone all the way around the implant. Let's start at the top again. I have no bone on this aspect of the implant here, as you can see. Lock the implant. All right, how do we fix this? Start at the top, see if we like this. I don't want to get too close to here. What if I over drilled by accident? Or God forbid, the drill went too long. We want to have a little bit of a buffer here in this area, here to here. All right. Whoa, it's glitching. Software is glitching. Let's see if we like this position. Now the software did not detect it, but there is a mesial root that it did detect, and there's a distal root that the segmentation did not detect. So in this position, we have to realize if we put the implant in this position, I'm not going to have bone here, not native bone, when this root comes out, and I'm not going to have bone here not going to have native bone here when this root tip comes out also. So let's carefully note that. Let's see if we like this implant position. Let's see what it looks like over here. Yeah, I don't like that. Since the software is glitching. Oh, now it stopped glitching. Okay, good. Yeah, I don't like that implant position with that being the path. Absolutely not. That's not going to work. Let's see what we can do. What if I tilt this way? Yeah, you could, but that's very tilted. Look at how tilted that is. That's a weird angle. Yeah, there's a distal root tilt on teeth, but not to that extent. That's excessive. Okay, so let's get rid of some of that angulation and drag this forward. Now, well, we didn't get rid of the angle. Let's get rid of some of that angle. Oh, that's starting to look pretty good according to this lower left model here. That's not bad. Let's see if that looks good in the bone. How do we do that? We go here. Let's start at the top. All right, start at the top. Now remember, this root tip outlined in green will be missing before I put the implant in. Before I place the implant, this root tip will be removed, and also this root tip here that was not detected by the software will also be removed. So we need to keep that in mind. Let's do the spin around, see if I like this implant placement. No bone here. Okay, I'm looking at this slice. Now remember, this triangle pointing at you, this took me a long time to figure out, but it tells you what slice you're looking at. All right, what do I mean? What I mean is, all right, you are always looking at the point, meaning if I'm a person standing here with my eyes pointed in this direction, all right, I'm standing here looking over here. On the left is the buccal. All right, on the left is the buccal here. On the right is the lingual. On the right is the lingual. The opposite would be this. Okay, this green line orientation with the triangle pointing that way means that, let's pretend I'm standing here looking at this. That means if I'm standing here looking at this, on the left would be the lingual. So on the left is the lingual. And on the right would be the buccal. On the right would be the buccal. Let's go this way. It's a little easier for me to keep track of it in this angulation. All right, so I'm looking from here. So left is the buccal, right is the lingual. Okay. So how do we get this implant placed in a better spot that has bone such that there is native bone all the way around the implant? Let's see if that's possible. Well, I don't know if it's possible, but let's try moving it distally unlock, whoops, unlock, and move it. And let's try that. And let's fix the angle because look at this. This is crazy there. Oh, I don't like that already. No, Control Z, and Control Z again. Oh, there we go. All right. Can we get away from this lack of buccal bone here? How do we do that? What if we go distally? Oh, now we're very distal. That's too distal. Maybe we just go this way. And all right, so let's see here. We're tilted very, very lingually with our path of implant, as you can see here. I don't like that very much. Let's go to surfaces and make this purple stone model a little bit transparent. And I will show you why that's useful. Because if we do that, see this line here? That is the same as this line here. In other words, we can see what plane we're in, and that it can be useful. Let's start at the top. All right, so this is telling me that here we have a lack of bone, buccal. That's right here where this is pointing. That's the slice that we are in. All right, let's do that again. Okay, I'm very lingually positioned here with my implant path. This looks better. Now, it looks better on the implant crown, but does it look better in the bone in 3 dimensions? Let's find out. Now remember, this is a 5x8. See how I'm pointing to the center, more or less, the center of that fake tooth. Let's see if we like that. Start at the top. All right, we're still lacking buccal bone here. But remember, we're the edge of the implant is pretty far away from the edge of that tooth root that will be removed. Let's see what the distance is. So we go up here, we left click this, left click, left click. So about 3.7 millimeters away. Now get out of measure mode. Okay. And we can move this thing around wherever we want. Okay. The fact that we're 3.7 millimeters away with this positioning tells me that we can put some bone graft and PRF in here, and maybe we can get away with placement of the implant in this position. Maybe we can do better, though. Let's see what else we can do. What if we move this distally? All right, that looks favorable over here. But does it work in the bone? Let's find out. Start at the top. I don't think I like this position, but let's try it. Now remember, this root tip will be removed. So not only will I be missing native bone here in this scenario, I will also be missing bone here. It looks like tooth number 31 has drifted a little bit mesially. How do we know that? If we look at the model, all right, you can tell that this 31 and 32 have drifted mesially. How do we know? Because, well, let's look. With this thing being broken probably for several years, these two inevitably would drift mesially. We already know that. We know how teeth work we know how dentistry works, that the teeth distal to a space are going to start to tilt mesially into the space. We know how that works. Now, before restoring this with an implant crown, it might be best to shave off some of the mesial of this number 31 crown. In fact, there's probably about 100% chance that I would shave off some of this mesial without perforating the crown, but let's shave off some of this to make a better contact at the time of restoration, because this plane is tilted. Let's make it a vertical plane like this. All right, more like this. Now you can't go crazy with grinding on it. You don't want to perforate the crown, obviously, but this angle here is not great for putting a crown here and having a good contact. You want to flatten this out by making it, instead of this angle here, you want it to be more like this, something like that. All right, so back to blue sky plan. Let's put our fake tooth back on. Now, considering that at the time of restoration, probably this tooth number 30 will be bigger in the distal direction. Let's make it a little bit bigger here, and let's make it a little bit taller to be a little bit more accurate. Yeah, I like that. All right, lock tooth. We're getting very close to this border. I don't like that. This is the lingual. This is the buccal. Remember, the functional cusp of the mandibular teeth, the functional cusp is the buccal cusp. That's the cusp that's going to take most of the load of chewing, assuming the bite is not in cross bite. Okay, this might be better. Let's see. Looks great here, but that does not tell the whole story. Now remember, it does not have to, the implant path does not, it is not imperative that the implant path is in the dead center of the tooth. We have to put the implant where the bone is most favorable, especially in the case of an immediate placement implant. So I'm not so focused on the implant path being exactly in the center of the tooth. That would be great, but if it's better to put the implant rather, in a better position to take advantage of the bone, then that is what you do. All right, so one thing I'm noticing is that with the present position of the implant, of the, digital implant here, we have this native bone above. So maybe we move this up and take advantage of this length down here by using a 5x10 instead of a 5x8. So let's try that. Let's lock the implant, replace the implant with a 5x10 and see what that looks like. See if we like it. I like that. At least in this position, I like that. Let's straighten out here. All right. Okay, I like the fact that we are more or less in the middle, mesiodistally, we are more or less in the middle. We are a little bit to the lingual, which might not be a bad thing. That might be necessary to keep it there. Maybe we can straighten this out and get a little closer to the center. We don't have much space here. I'm not crazy about that. Okay, let's try that. This is a tricky one. This is a tricky case. This is not an easy case to plan like this. Okay, let's do this. Let's go over here. Let's get rid of the fake tooth. Let's get rid of this stone model. Let's go back to the mandibular bone model. Okay, this tells us where the mandibular bone is. Now, seeing it from this position, from this angle, I'm not so worried about missing that buccal bone here. Why? Because buccolingually, we are far away from that area. Now remember, this piece right here is not bone. That's tooth root, remember? That piece right here is the distal root that we can see right here. This piece here, this is approximately this. Okay, so we can't forget about that. It's not like, oh yeah, the entire implant will have native bone, will be sitting next to native bone on the distal. No, we have that tooth root there that will be removed, of course. Let's start at the top. Let's see if we like this. All right, we got native bone here on the buccal. How much do we have on the buccal? 2 point something. Okay, that's pretty good. Remember, this tooth root tip will be gone. Obviously, it's unfortunate that the software, when it did the segmentation, it did not detect this as a broken tooth root. It would be nice if it did. Then we would have an outline around that broken tooth root, just like we do on the mesial. We would have an outline around the distal root tip that's broken. That would make planning a little bit easier, but we can work around it. So we have a 5x10 planned here. And I would say that's probably as good as it gets. Could we use a 5x8 and go a little bit deeper? Yeah, we could. But let's plan it like this. Now, this is a Neodent implant. I use the Easy Guide system for Neodent, which requires, let's go over here to the software guide tube area, the lower right part of the screen. This is a 5mm implant, 5mm diameter implant. So the software guide tube width is going to be 5.86, and the offset for that system is 10. The offset is the distance from the top of the implant platform to the hub on the drill. In other words, I drill, and then the hub on the drill stops me right here. The distance from here to here is 10. Let's verify that. .86, basically 10. All right. Okay. Let's get rid of that. $10mm. All right, that's our offset. Okay, so let's go back to the trimmed model that we created. There's the bony model. That's the iTero scan. And there's the first closed model that we made from the iTero scan. But we don't want that one. We're not going to make the guide on that model. We're going to make the guide on the model where we trimmed out part of that mesial root. Look at the difference. That goes to that. Notice this area has been trimmed. All right, so let's put our implant back. And that fits. Okay, so we are ready to design the guide. So we go to Guide Panel, Guide Orientation, Mandible. What model are we using? The purple one, called Stone Model. In fact, let's go over here so that we don't get them mixed up. As I said earlier, the ones that I trim, I make in light purple. It's just a habit I developed. All right. Okay, so we're going to highlight that, go to Guide Panel. That's the model that we're going to use. Guide quality, let's do high, because very high, why not? All right, now draw curve. Click on draw curve, and then you hold down the shift key. I don't know what that goofy looking thing is, so I don't want my guide leaning on it. Let's start here. Hold down the shift key, and then with your mouse, left click, left click, left click, left click, left click, left click. Move this over, reorient. All right, hold down shift again. Left click, left click, left click, left click, left click. Let go of shift, turn the model. Hold down shift, left click, let go of shift. Hold down shift, left click, left click. Right click to remove one of the dots. Turn the model with, okay, shift, left click, left click, left click. Let go of shift. Let's move this here, turn the model, turn the model. Okay, that looks pretty good. We have to connect this. Hold down shift again, put another dot here. There it is, connected. Let's get that ring off the screen so we can see what path of insertion we want. You can tell the software what path of insertion you want the guide to have. And I like to orient this such that I can see all or almost all of the dots from an occlusal view. So how do we do that? Let's bring some of these up a little higher. All right, that's probably as close as we're going to get it for our path of insertion. So once we are happy with that, you don't want to insert it in this path. Obviously, you want to get it so we can see as many of these dots as possible. Okay. All right, define insertion direction. Define insertion direction from the view that we have right now. Yes, click that. Okay. Maximum allowed undercut. I don't want any undercuts allowed, so I'm going to put that to 0. All right. All right. Create surgical guide. Wait a minute. I don't want the brush diameter to be 15. Well, let's just use it with the default of 15 and see what we get. Create surgical guide. Now, that's not a useful guide. Why? I don't see any software guide tubes. Let's delete that. What did we do wrong? Go back to guide panel, draw curve. What did we do wrong? We did not have the software guide tube showing. All right, so let's get that off the screen for a moment. Go back to guide panel, draw curve, get it oriented such that we can see as many dots as possible, and then put that software guide tube back on. Then go back to guide panel, define insertion direction, define from the view. Yes, we have 0 undercuts, and create surgical guide. All right, let's turn the software guide tube off. That's not bad. I would not want this area any thinner here. That's getting a little thin, but that's still acceptable. That's not likely to break during the surgery. This is nice and thick here. I like that. This is acceptable in my opinion, this thickness. But if this got any thinner from here to here, I wouldn't like it. Let's say that, okay, we talked for a minute about this brush diameter up here being 15. What does that mean? That means that from here to here, that circle that it created is 15 millimeters. That wide, 15 millimeter wide brush made this get a little bit thin. So let's delete this surgical guide that we just made, right? Go back to guide panel. Make this like, say, 12.5. Okay. Mandible, we're on the proper model. 12.5, very high. Draw a curve. Let's orient the model the way we want it to see the most dots possible. Define insertion direction, define from view. Okay, that's done. Go back to implant, put the software guide tube on, go back to guide panel. This is going to make a 12.5 brush sweep all the way around rather than 15. Create surgical guide. Go back to implant list, turn the software guide tube off. Let's check it out. I like that a little bit better because this is not so thin here. Notice the circle that the sweep that brush did was only 12.5 millimeters from here to here and here to here. All right. Now, what I like to do in order to verify that that the guide is fully seated is I like to trim the guide a little bit here so I see more tooth poking through, and trim it a little bit here so I see more tooth poking through. Now, I can't trim it too much here because I don't want this getting too thin. So let's plan on trimming the surgical guide in this area. First, we're going to go back to surfaces and label this as surgical guide number 30, SG_number 30. Okay. Now we go to model manipulation because we're going to start trimming. Actually, no, we're going to go to surfaces. Let's make this a little bit transparent so we can see where we're going to trim. Now in Blue Sky Plan, when you do any cutting with the cutting tool here, surface culling, they call it, it's only going to cut one model at a time. In other words, if I start cutting here, it will not cut any of the purple model if the orange is the one that's highlighted. It will cut only the model that is highlighted here. So make sure you have the proper model selected. We want to trim a little bit of this surgical guide, so make sure that the orange model is selected. Cut. Get out of cut mode. Get rid of the transparency so we can see a little bit better. Ah, I like that. Now I can see that. You know what? No, I want to redo that. Control Z. And let's try that again. I want to have the cut end up in the center of the tooth here. So go to cut. Go like this. Get out of cut mode. Yeah, I like that a lot better. Why do I like that better? Because when the guide is fully seated, I will know that the guide is fully seated when I see the guide touching the occlusal of this number 29. That's more useful to me than, the entire tooth poking through. If I can look in the patient's mouth and see that, oh yes, the guide is touching the occlusal of 29 and it's touching the occlusal of 31, I know for a fact the guide is fully seated. So that looks good to me. Let's get rid of the purple model and the implant, and let's trim a little bit of this excess here on the lower. Though we have to do that very carefully. Let's do it like this. Make sure the right model is selected. Go to cut. Get out of cut mode. Let's take a look. How does that fit on the model? That fits well. Now, this is a picky thing to do here, but I would find it more useful if I could see this surgical guide ending in the center of that tooth rather than where these two teeth meet. All right, let's raise the transparency so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, in the same way that I want the guide ending in the middle of this occlusal here and touching the occlusal here, it would be more useful for my peace of mind to know that the guide is ending here. So let's do that. We're going to go to cut and right there. And let's get rid of that sharp edge right there. All right, reduce the transparency. Now, I will know that the guide is fully seated when I see it touching the occlusal of 31 right here, touching the occlusal of 29 right there, and touching the middle of the occlusal of the canine here. That gives me 3 places to look to verify that, in fact, the guide is fully seated. Now, just a personal preference here, I don't like this little thing hanging off the distal there. Let's cut some of that off. But we can't cut too much. I don't want to get it too thin here. I'm not going to chop it here. I'm going to chop it like right here. All right, so let's do that. Again, make sure that the surgical guide, the one we want to cut, is the one that's highlighted. Wait a minute. I'm going to turn this a little bit. All right, cut. Get out of cut mode. Yeah, I like that better. Let's get the purple model off the screen, get rid of any sharp edges. Sharp edge would be this. Go back to the orange. Yep. Cut mode. Get rid of that sharp edge. Get out of cut mode. Put the purple model back on. Do we like the way it fits? Yeah. Now, I might want to get rid of this. I might want to cut it here so that I don't have any chance of this model getting so that I don't have any problems seating this model on the, or seating the guide on the model. So I want to trim some of this to reduce the chances that I will have problems seating the guide on the model in the patient's mouth. So let's, wait a minute, go to the guide, hit cut mode, and then go like that. For the same reason, let's cut a little bit here. Get out of cut mode, let's take a look. Yeah, I like that better. That reduces the chances that we will have trouble seating the guide. This is plenty thick from here to here. It's not going to break. Same with here to here. It's not going to break. Let's get rid of some of this excess guide material down here for the same reason. Go to cut. Get rid of this sharp edge. Like that. Get rid of this sharp edge like that. Get out of cut mode so I can move everything. And let's get rid of this sharp edge over here. Get out of cut mode. Let's take a look and see how it would fit the model. This looks like it's possibly going to impinge on the tissues in the mouth. I don't want that hassle when I'm doing the surgery. Let's cut some of that out. Get rid of that sharp edge. Get rid of this sharp edge. Now this, let's get out of cut mode. This sharp edge I'm okay with. Why? Because that's not impinging on the tissue. That's fine. Let's check it out. This is sufficiently thick from here to here. This is sufficiently thick from here to here. We can see here the occlusal of 29 when the guide is fully seated. We can see here the occlusal of 31 when the guide is fully seated. We can see here the occlusal, or incisal rather, of the canine number 27 when the guide is fully seated. We've gotten rid of our sharp edges. We got rid of any bulk on the buccal and the lingual that could make it difficult to seat this guide. I think we're in good shape. Let's put our markings on the guide. So we get rid of the purple model, go to guide panel, make sure the surgical guide is selected. Yes. All right. Text tool. This is number 30. So we type that in, then we move the model. We cannot move the text, but we can move the model. All right, emboss and engrave. Emboss makes a raised marking. Engrave is going to do the opposite and carve into the guide. Let's not carve into the guide. Let's do emboss. All right, see how that's raised? Got number 30 there. 30. And if you want to be really particular, you could go over here and type in what size implant. What size implant did we use? 5 by 10. Turn the implant off. Go back to guide panel. Go over to here, 5.0 by 10. You could mark that on the guide if you want. Certainly you don't have to. Apply text. Now, if you want to put the patient's name on it, you could also do that. Let's say his name is John Smith. Oh, wait a minute. Shift return. All right. And we want to put John Smith's name here, for example. Now his name isn't John Smith, but you get the point. Apply text. And there you have it. Now, I recommend that you export and print two different items. We want to print the model that the guide will fit to. Now, which model is that? The trimmed model. Why the trimmed model? Because in the mouth, we're going to remove these two root tips, and then we're going to place our guide on it. The smartest thing to do, in my opinion, is to print this purple model, is to print the model of the area where the guide is going to fit in the mouth, and also print the guide. So let's put the patient's name on the model. How do we do that? We go back to guide panel, select the model that we want to put markings on. That would be this one, of course. Go back to here. And, oh, yeah, we already had it in the place. Shift return John. Maybe we want to make it all on the same line. Now we don't want to put it here. Why do we not want to put it here? Because remember, the guide will be there. I don't want, oh, that would not interfere. We don't want it up here interfering with the guide because this is going to create raised markings. So let's go over here, turn that off, go back to guide panel. Okay, the purple one is selected. We can make that big if we want. Now let's double check. Will the guide interfere with that positioning? Nope. Okay, guide panel. Yep. Okay, apply text. Now we have the model marked with his name on it. And we have the surgical guide marked with the tooth number that we're going to be, where we're going to place the implant, number 30, the size of the implant, and his name on the guide. So we want to save this. Okay, now that it's saved, let's export these two models, the purple model and the guide. So we go to export, we go to the file menu, export data, select them all, then unselect them. We don't want the nerve selected, we don't want the implant selected, we don't want the virtual teeth selected. We want only that purple model and the surgical guide. Export quality very high. Export file format, STL. All right, so we can print it. Export separated files to a folder. Yes. We have the two highlighted that we want to export, and nothing else is selected. And now we hit export, and it's going to ask me where. I like to make a new folder for STL files that I need to print for this patient. Select that folder. Boom. All right, now that's it. Now it's time to print these two items, and we're all done with the planning.